I believe you have a good faith position on this, and we have disagreements on it. But I want to just, I can't let you elide over the question of the treatment of Christians and clergy.
I know. I heard
and
that
would
again,
you be?
Tucker.
Well, no, but hold on. Would you be
problem is
willing?
you don't accept my answer. I just told you that I asked the religious leader in Kiev if it was happening. You asked me if I raised the issue, and I did.
Okay.
I mean, Tucker, look.
Wait, but hold on. Don't you think?
Let me explain to you what I think our national interest is there.
I would think you would have greater concern for religious liberty in Ukraine. And I'm surprised by your
I told you I raised the issue of religious liberty.
No, you spoke to one person who's clearly on one side of it.
Tucker Carlson and Mike Pence got together at the summit today for an interview. It was super tense, a lot of frustration on both sides. Pence visibly got upset, snapped at Tucker, and I have the whole thing on tape. I've cut out all the boring parts, and so let's check it out.
So I have to ask you, since you were a witness to and in some unintentional way a participant in one of the most widely covered events in American history, January 6th, what was that? Do you think that was an insurrection?
Well, first, can I just take a moment just to say thank you to the family leader, to Bob Vanderplatz and the whole team.
He's such a politician.
And to our friends at Blaze TV, including my old friend Glenn. Now, as to that day, let me just say, all I know for sure, having lived through it at the Capitol, is that it was a tragic day. I've never used the word insurrection, Tucker, over the last 2 years, but it was a riot that took place at the Capitol that day. 50 law enforcement officers that were assaulted. Obviously, the tragic loss of life ransacking the Capitol that occurred. But I really do believe that a day of tragedy became a triumph of freedom. And I'll always believe that by God's grace, I did my duty that day under the Constitution of the United States of America and our institutions held.
When you say the tragic loss of life, who are you referring to?
Well, obviously, Ashley Babbitt would come to mind immediately.
What do you think of the fact that she was shot?
Well, I just think it was a tragic moment.
You can tell Pence is, trying to walk the line here. He's basically wanting to agree with all the liberals, saying that, if you watch any news station, they're always saying how officers were killed. And so Tucker definitely was testing him there to see if he was going to tell the truth or not, because there were no officers that were killed by violence that day. So he just wanted to kind of see if he can catch him in a lie. Pence didn't fall for it, but you can see that Pence doesn't want to upset the crowd, but at the same time, he, wants to agree with, the mainstream media. So,
without question. But I have to tell you that seeing people assaulting law enforcement officers, smashing windows, breaking into the Capitol building, it infuriated me. We uphold the rule of law, and we apply it equally and fairly. And I think that holding those accountable that rioted at the Capitol that day is right and proper. But I also believe that people that engaged in the hundreds of riots over the summer of 2020, literally burned out family businesses and communities, and also cost lives, must be held to account.
Amen. So we spent, when the BLM riot...
He can say that, but his actions, so far haven't pointed towards that being his true thoughts. He never mentions any other, rioting that went on, just that one. But maybe that's because he was involved in it. I don't know.
Riots happened, and the riot in front of the White House that injured more law enforcement personnel than January 6th. We spent a lot of time talking about why those rioters were mad. They were mad about systemic racism and the death of George Floyd, et cetera. Why do you think the people who swarmed the Capitol on January 6th were mad? And why haven't we talked about that?
Well, first off, I would tell you that I think the January 6th committee was a partisan committee in the Congress of the United States.
He didn't ask him about the committee. He's asking about why they were mad.
And it failed its historic mission of bringing the facts forward.
Yep.
And
he's just skipping the question, I guess.
I know your commitment to bringing all the facts to the American people, Tucker. And I know we're grateful for that. The truth of the matter is, as some members of the staff of the January 6th committee said after it adjourned, they spent all their time focused so much on one individual and on placing blame that they spent very little time focusing on law enforcement failures that happened that day and intelligence failures that happened that day.
Nancy Pelosi turned down the National Guard that Trump offered prior to January 6th. I wonder why.
And I hold to the view that we can never let this happen again. We can never allow the capital of the greatest nation on earth to be subject to a riot for any purpose, for any motivation. And for that reason, we need to understand why law enforcement that day was not better equipped.
Wonder, though, again about motive, since these were, and I'm not excusing any act of violence ever anywhere, including on January 6th. However, they were American citizens. Most of them didn't commit acts of violence, and they were really mad. And they were mad because they thought the election was unfair.
Right.
And I wonder why more time hasn't been spent by either party reassuring Americans that our elections are real, that all votes are counted, that the electronic voting machines, which no one seemed to trust 10 years ago, now are infallible, why mail-in voting is a good thing. Like, why doesn't anybody try to reassure the public that the mechanics of voting are legit? And are they? Do you think the last election was fair?
Well, as I said on January 6th in my communication to the Congress, and have said many times since, there were irregularities in the 2020 election. There's no
That's about the softest way you could describe it.
question. There were about a half a dozen states that changed the rules of elections in the name of COVID.
Yep.
And that undermined public confidence in the outcome of our elections. Now, at the end of the day, we brought more than 60 lawsuits, states engaged in recounts. And when states ultimately certified and courts upheld those changes in virtually every instance, and ultimately we were able to determine that the changes, there was no evidence that the changes had changed the outcome of the election in any way. I knew that my duty was clear that day.
First of all, there was more than irregularities. There was, of course, he's right. There was a lot of changes in the rules. You know, a lot of the laws were changed right before the election. Of course, a lot of the states extended the amount of time that voting would be allowed. Another thing they did, of course, was send out mass mail-in ballots, which had never been done before. You also had the intelligence agencies that have since been proven to have conspired to suppress the Hunter laptop story. You have the verified emails that the FBI and Twitter were working hand in hand to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop, to suppress conservatives. You can go on and on about all the irregularities. That doesn't mention, all the firsthand accounts of ballot stuffing. That doesn't mention, the people pulling suitcases out and, scanning the same ballots over and over again. That doesn't count the fact that we have eyewitnesses saying that they had thousands of ballots that they were only filled out in Joe Biden's name. Like no other congressman was filled out, senator was filled out. There's a lot of mathematicians that said that the numbers don't match up. Like, there were instances where more voters voted in a certain county than there actually were registered voters. And it just goes on and on. It's much more than an irregularity. So,
but candidly, as I've said before, President Trump's words that day were reckless. I believe whatever his intentions in that moment, it endangered me and my family and everyone that was at the Capitol that day. I believe history will hold him accountable for that, just as the law will hold everyone that engaged in acts of violence.
But may I just too confident that a country with electronic voting machines, ours, can have an election that you're participating in that everyone can trust?
I think history will hold Pence accountable for that day. It's going to hold Nancy Pelosi accountable for that day, and it's going to hold the Democrats accountable for that day, because that's what really went wrong.
Well, I believe we can, but I welcome the fact that since 2020, Republican-led states around the country have enacted election integrity reforms. I'm somebody that believes that, and Indiana was the first state to do this. I'm somebody that believes that you ought to be required to give a picture ID when you go in to vote. We ought to have voter ID in every state in America. But with regard to voting machines, I would tell you we had them in Indiana, but in Indiana and elsewhere, they produce paper ballots. Recounts were taken in states around the country. And I think it's absolutely essential that we do everything in our power to restore public confidence in the one person, one vote principle at the heart of this republic.
Why not just get rid of electronic voting machines and call it a day, and then we don't have to debate it?
Well, I would certainly be open to that.
Is there a downside?
But what I believe, Tucker, is that states govern elections.
So what he's really saying is he's not really going to do anything. He's saying, yeah, we're going to let the states do whatever they want. He as president is going to do absolutely nothing to strengthen the election laws. What we need is, we need paper ballots. If we use machines, the machines must have a paper trail that can be verified. And what they need to do is the federal government shouldn't be dictating the election, but they should have certain minimums that have to be met. He just mentioned voter ID. That's a good one. Voter ID, that should be a minimum. That should be something that the government can pass. They're not going to dictate to the states exactly, X, Y, Z, this is how you conduct an election, but they should have minimums required. The person needs to be a citizen of this country. The person has to identify themselves. The person has to sign. The ballot has to be, if they use a machine, it has to be backed up by a paper ballot. Preferably, we don't even use machines. They could dictate that as well. And another thing is they could also put a law in place that if one of the candidates suspects that there's something wrong, by law, they have to have access to the actual ballots so that they can examine them forensically. Because what we have found through this past election was that it was incredibly difficult to just see the ballots. Like how much would have been avoided if Trump would have said, you know what, I'm gonna exercise my right to forensically examine these ballots. He then goes into the place with his team. They sit down, they pull open the ballots. Everything's recorded. Everything's, being taken care of. And they can then examine the ballots. Right then and there, they can find discrepancies and then bring those forward. Why is it so difficult to just get access to the ballots? They never got access to the ballots. And when they did, all they did was recount them. Well, it doesn't matter if you recount the same bad ballots. They need to forensically audit it. And so that should be a bare minimum law that they pass, that if you are a candidate in the election and you suspect that something went wrong, you and your team should have direct access to these ballots, supervised, of course, and you should be able to verify and look through it. It shouldn't be so difficult, and people shouldn't be able to stop you from doing that. And that's what happened. And he also mentioned like 60 court cases, and it was found and determined that there was the legislative branch, the judicial branch, all those judges, they felt that issues with elections should be resolved by the legislative branch. So all the judges either didn't have the courage to take up the case, but mostly what I think is that they all felt, according to the Constitution, that election oversight is not in their purview. It's the legislative branch, through what Mike Pence should have done, through sending the ballots back to the states, certifying the election, all that. Those are all steps taken that could help with the election. So that's why those cases were dropped. They didn't even look at them. They said that's not part of the judicial branch's job, and that's what they said. They didn't say that there was no fraud. So I hate that people say that. the fact that you have a Republican here, supposedly a Republican, saying that, it just tells you this guy is a rhino, big time. He's a politician through and through. He speaks like a politician. Everything about him reeks of politician. He's got no courage at all. I remember whenever the primary was going on in 2015, and he was pressured to endorse Ted Cruz, and he was so meekly endorsed Ted Cruz, and at the same time he sort of kind of endorsed Trump. It was like he can't pick a side, and that's what you're seeing here when Tucker's pressing him on these issues. He's not picking a side. He's not willing to take a stance because he's a politician, and that's how politicians do it.
States ought to conduct our elections. In fact, our founding fathers debated this at the Constitutional Convention.
It seems like it's a constitutional.
That's true. The states should conduct the elections, but there should be a bare minimum. There should be a bare minimum. They can't like California. There's never going to be a Republican governor of California ever again because it's so corrupt. It's so bad over there. So there has to be a minimum.
Principle, that seems right to me. But in point of fact, no state, including ones with Republican governors, has really done anything about election integrity. They have not restored elections to what they were in, say, 1992, where you have paper ballots, you have voting on the day of the election, and you have voter ID. Like, these are super simple, but no one's done it. Why?
Well, I think there's plenty of opportunity to advance election integrity reforms around the country. As long as we don't intrude on the independence of states to conduct elections and to manage their elections, there are ways the federal government could provide resources and encourage reforms. And if I'm president of the United States, I promise you, we'll fight every day to restore public confidence in the elections.
Such a weak answer. You know, that's such a weak answer. And then at the end of it, he says, "Oh, I promise I'll do my best." He doesn't care. Obviously, he doesn't care about this topic
In this country.
So you've issued thank you for that. You've issued a bunch of public statements about your views on foreign policy, which are definitely within the mainstream of Republican views, as far as I can tell. You recently met with Zelensky, according to news reports. And I'm wondering if during that meeting, as a prominent Christian leader, which you are in addition to your political views, you broached the question of his treatment of Christians within Ukraine. The Zelensky government has raided convents, arrested priests, has effectively banned a denomination, a Christian denomination, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church within Ukraine, has persecuted Christians. And I wonder if you raised that with him.
Ukraine is not a democracy. He literally puts people in prison over there. He puts his political enemies in prison. They want to help Ukraine because that's where a lot of the corruption goes. They send money to Ukraine, and something that the I forgot what that guy's name was, the guy with the crypto exchange, the big, that young, like, fat guy, I forgot what his name is, but he was recently arrested. Anyways, they've shown that the government is sending money to Ukraine, and then Ukraine is using cryptocurrency to then contribute to Democrat and Rhino Republicans' campaigns. So, I mean, that's really why, that's what's going on. So this is if Ukraine falls, you know, there's a good chance their, you know, source of money is also going to fall. It's a revolving thing. They send money to Ukraine, the government then, being as corrupt as it is, then launders that money into cryptocurrency through that one guy, and then he then contributes to these people's campaigns, so basically they're giving money to themselves, and Ukraine's taking a cut. So now that Ukraine is being threatened, they can't have that money dry up, you know. That, and of course, I think that's the main reason, to be honest with you.
I did raise the issue when we were there, and I raised it with the leader of the Orthodox Church.
He just asked him if he raised it with Zelensky, and he said he raised it with some church leader. Okay, what about Zelensky?
When I was visiting Kyiv, and asked him about concerns about religious liberty. He assured me that the Zelensky government in Ukraine was respecting religious liberty, even while recognizing that there were very small elements of the Russian Orthodox Church.
So the Russians are the bad guys. Got it.
That were being utilized for the purpose of advancing the Russian cause in Ukraine. Other than the sanctity of life, there's no higher priority in my life than preserving the freedom of religion in America and championing religious liberty around the world.
I'm confused. On this question, it's very clear that the Zelensky government has arrested priests for having views they disagree with. That's not consistent with religious liberty. It's an attack on it, and we're funding it. And I'm just wondering how is it, and I don't mean to be disrespectful at all, but I sincerely wonder how a Christian leader could support the arrest of Christians for having different views.
Well, what I can tell you is I asked the Christian leader in Kiev if that was in fact happening, and he assured me that it was not.
So he's just going to believe this guy whenever they have confirmed reports that it is happening. First of all, this particular topic, like, in my opinion, it's really not that important because anytime, they ask this question all the time, is Putin a killer? Is Kim Jong-un a killer? Is President Xi a killer? Why, did you bring that up at the meeting? Did you accuse President Xi of murdering people, of Putin, of jailing his competitors? These are awful killers and blah, blah, blah. No, because that's the leader of the country. Like, you got to work with what you got, And I wish these politicians would just say the truth, which is, look, Putin is the leader of Russia. Zelensky is the leader of Ukraine. Xi is the leader of China. We have to work with what we got. If I go there and just accuse him of murdering people, it's going to achieve nothing. I have to work in the Americans' best interest, and we have to work with these people. Guess what? There's a lot of bad leaders out there. There's a lot of people that have done bad things. They're still the leader of that country. We still have to deal with them. So I wish that they would be more direct. I wish they would have more guts and more balls when they answer questions like this. He should just say, look, he's the leader of Ukraine. Like, we got to work with what we got. This is the guy. What do you want me to do? You want me to have him assassinated and try to find somebody else to take his spot? Like, we can't, obviously that's ridiculous. We're not doing that. And as far as the way Christians are treated, like, we just have to acknowledge, like, that's the way Christians are being treated in that country. We should call it out for what it is. Stop calling Ukraine a democracy and call it out for what it is. And for him to just turn no, just be honest. Just say, look, they don't treat Christians great over there. We know that, but we have to do, what we believe is the best interest of the country. And I'd have more respect for that answer,
People were not being persecuted for their religious beliefs. Now,
he said
let me take a break here. I know we disagree on this strongly, but I respect your right to your opinion on Ukraine, and I trust you'll respect mine.
Okay.
I just hate the way he talks. He talks like he's like as much of a politician as you can be.
Look, I've been to Ukraine now twice. My wife and I traveled into Ukraine a month after the initiation of hostilities. We traveled then with a group called...
I believe you have a good faith position on this, and we have disagreements on it, but I want to I can't let you elide over the question of the treatment of Christians and clergy.
I know, I heard
and
that
would
again,
you be,
Tucker.
well, no, but hold on. Would you be
problem is
willing?
you don't accept my answer. I just told you that I asked the religious leader in Kiev if it was happening. You asked me if I raised the issue, and I did.
And I'm saying
I also raised it with the Ukrainians, and I was told that there are religious leaders who have been working with the Russian military that is murdering people by the thousands.
Okay.
I mean, Tucker, look.
Wait, but hold on. Don't you think...
Let me explain to you what I think our national interest is there.
I would think you would have greater concern for religious liberty in Ukraine. And I'm surprised by your
I told you I raised the issue of religious liberty.
No, you spoke to one person who's clearly on one side of it, and there are many, many news reports that are not disputed by anybody that many clergy have been arrested in Ukraine. And I'm merely saying I may not agree with their views. I'm not Russian Orthodox, but you can't arrest clergy for having different views, period. Because if you do, you violate the basic tenet of
Look,
religious liberty.
I want to be clear with you. I won't stand by it. I won't stand for it. If people are being persecuted for their religious beliefs, I won't stand for it. In any country with which a country of our nation is supporting or our allies are supporting.
Yes.
Period, paragraph. But let me say to you, our national interest in Ukraine, I believe, is born of the fact that I spent 10 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. I spent 4 years as vice president. I've met Vladimir Putin. Let me tell you, if Vladimir Putin overruns Ukraine, I have no doubt that in a short period of time, that Russian military is going to cross a border of a NATO country that our armed forces will have to go and defend.
That's such BS. That's a lie. First of all, we've known for many years that Putin doesn't want NATO on his border. We've known that for a long time. He's made that very clear. He's drawn the line in the sand, and we've thrown China into, we've put China and Putin together because Putin obviously is going to need help because the United States is partnering up with Ukraine. Biden is the one that says, oh, yeah, we're going to bring Ukraine into the fold, knowing that that's a red line for Putin. So knowing that, he did it anyways because he wanted this. He wanted him to invade. He wanted this whole situation because this is how they, this is how they operate. Like, this is how we got into Iraq. This is how we got into all these other wars. Everybody forgot about Iraq. Now it's the new thing. Now it's going to be Ukraine. This is going to go on forever. And the truth is, you cannot win a war when the other country has nuclear weapons. You just can't. They have like thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons. Russia will never lose because once they start to lose, say I'm Russia, I'm getting my ass kicked, I'm about to lose. I'm not just gonna let myself die. I'm not just gonna let my country, burn to the ground when I have nukes right here. So yeah, you cannot win. You can't win. So it's a fruitless, it's an endless war because we keep supporting Ukraine. It should have never happened in the first place, which is what Trump says. And now that it has happened, the correct course of action is to bring it to a stop as soon as possible and to stop sending them all this money. Again, this whole thing was created by Biden.
When they cross a border that we would have to defend.
So you would oppose Ukraine entering NATO? Because that would, of course, immediately require us to go to war with Russia, which you oppose.
I said very clearly that Ukrainian entrance into NATO should depend on when the war is over. And I made that clear with President Zelensky that was my view. And what I understood in speaking with him was he understood that it needed to be conditional. If we were to allow Ukraine to join NATO today, then the obligations of the NATO Treaty on Mutual Defense would initiate immediately, and we'd be pulled into a conflict. I don't want that to happen. But I do believe that after the war is won and over, that welcoming Ukraine into NATO, embracing them with open arms in the West is in the interest of our security and of our nation in the long term. Yeah.
Okay, a lot of things right there. First of all, NATO countries have to contribute money. They have to contribute a portion of their GDP. They have to contribute troops. They have to contribute to NATO in order to get the benefits of NATO. So the fact that we're just going to support Ukraine, who's not a member of NATO, when they've given us nothing in return, they've contributed nothing, makes no sense at all. And then also what he's talking about when the war's won, well, we already established that's not going to happen. It's an unwinnable war. But let's just say it did win. Putin has already made it clear he doesn't want the NATO right next door. So all it's going to do is start another war. And now that Ukraine is NATO, now we have to protect them. And they have, again, not contributed anything. So it just doesn't make sense. It's like it's like life insurance. You get life insurance, and then somebody dies. Like the wife gets life insurance, and then the husband gets killed the next day. Like it doesn't work that way. Like Ukraine's like, let me get this insurance, and then I'm gonna cash it out immediately. Like, no, that doesn't work. Like, if they know that's gonna happen, they're not gonna give you the insurance. So why are we doing that with Ukraine? It just makes no sense. This guy's a clown. He's a typical politician. Anybody that's saying this kind of stuff, their donors are wanting them to be this way. They have no idea what they're talking about. It's stuff like this. This is exactly how we got into Iraq. This guy, his foreign policy is horrendous. I don't know. Him and Trump are on different sides, and it's just crazy that he was his VP.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President. I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, where's the concern for the United States in?
He cares more about Ukraine than he does about our country. And that goes for a lot of these politicians. And just think for a moment. Imagine your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife gets deployed, because they're talking about deploying troops now to Ukraine, gets deployed to Ukraine. God forbid they get killed over there. Now your family member literally gave up their life for another country. Like, when I sign up for the military, I sign up to die for this country, not for all the other countries. So, if that was my son, my father, my brother, anything, I would be pissed if my family member died on behalf of another country that's given us nothing in return to protect it. Makes no sense.
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern.
It's not his concern. He's not concerned with the United States. That's what he's saying. And this guy's running for president.
And as president of the United States, we're going to restore law and order in our cities. We're going to secure our border. We're going to get this economy moving again. And we're going to make sure that we have men and women on our courts at every level that will stand for the right to life and defend all the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution. Anybody that says that we can't be the leader of the free world and solve our problems at home has a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. We can do both.
And he's given no ideas. He's put no plan in place to get any of that stuff done he just mentioned. And we cannot do both. It's pretty clear we can't take care of the whole world and then take care of ourselves at the same time, because we'd be doing it if we could. Okay? We have to take care of ourselves first. And just like when you're on a plane, the masks drop down. They say the adult needs to put the mask on first and then help the child. You don't help the child first, because what will happen is, as you're helping the child, you'll go unconscious and then you'll both die. Or the child will survive, but the parent will die. So that's the same with our country. We can't help all these other countries while our country's going to hell and just expect that everything's going to be okay. No, we have to help ourselves first. Maybe instead of giving billions of dollars to Ukraine, we could have put billions of dollars towards, building our roads and building our bridges and helping, better plans, better schools, getting our border closed. Like that's just common sense.
Jets?
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President. I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, like, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern.
All right, guys, that's it for the video. If you've made it this far, do me a favor, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I'm trying to put out 3 to 4 videos every single week. And give me some feedback. Let me know how I did. Thanks. Bye-bye.